Hello, hello. Hello everyone, welcome to us. It's nice that you could find this very cozy little room in the Arendalsuka. Before I forget, I will just briefly say about the fire escape, because it was very intended I should tell about that. It's up the stairs. So if something happens, we go out there and up the stairs behind the coffee. And then there's other stairs up to the mountain behind. Yeah. So yeah, they're all welcome to this event. It's dedicated to facts, analysis, and the fight for justice in Ukraine. We in the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, we have been working on human rights and civil society in Eastern Europe and Central Asia since 1977. So in a couple of years we will invite you for a big jubilee celebration. This year, some of you might have noticed that we celebrated 50 years of the Helsinki Declaration, which was the start of also the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. And we've been working with civil society in Ukraine since long before 2014. And in 2014, we started documenting war crimes on Crimea, together with Hounds. And Valentyna here is a representative of that organization, and she will join us in the panel a little bit later. So, why do we document war crimes in Ukraine? Well, we documented war crimes in Chechnya from 2012, and so we have seen this before. We know that facts matter. Facts and analysis are important to counteract propaganda, disinformation, misinformation, denial, impunity, and the new violations. We need to talk about what happened, prove what happened. Some justice should be achieved for it, information should be changed in order to move on. But we saw with Chechnya, since we have a database both for Chechnya and for Ukraine, we can see the same officers involved in similar crimes in both conflicts. And this is due to the impunity. When you're not punished for the crimes that take place, they happen again. So what do we do to try to prevent this? Well, we have a very skilled and motivated team at the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, and the Documentation and Accountability Hub that I head. And we work together with Ukrainian partners on documentation purposes, but also on other topics, because it's important to see the holistic approach to human rights and documentation. And its representativity of victimization is important for us. You see what happens, you document what happened, and then you draw the conclusions. And we do that by the help of a database developed by Case Metrics Network, and it's an analytical database. So it's intended to find the trends over large conflicts over large periods of time with many violations. It draws all the contexts and provides us with analysis that we can use for creating sanction briefs, universal jurisdiction approaches, reports, input to international organizations like the UN, the OSCE, Moscow mechanism, and so on. And hopefully now for the special tribunal on aggression that we will also get back to a little bit later. Analysis is also used in the reparations processes by our partners in Ukraine. So civilians, they are the ones that are subject to the violations. They need to be heard. They need to know that the information that they share, the testimonies that they share, are stored somewhere, taken seriously and used for concrete purposes. Negotiations coming now, Ukrainians need to be heard, and facts need to be in place when you do the discussions. We also owe it to those who have shared their stories with us to follow up and achieve some sort of justice for them. We will get back today later in the discussion what this justice can look like. And today we will look more into what this actually means. My colleague Anna Pashalishvili will present to you our news report on the Russian occupation in the northern town of Balakliia. It was one of the first towns that was occupied over 6 months, and when the Russians were overtaken by the Ukrainian forces, there was a lot of evidence left. The report is available in the back of the room. It's also on our website. And we're also starting a series of fact sheets because we want to share the information about what is happening, all the facts that we have gathered in the database. There are 2 fact sheets available also in the back of the room, and they are available on our website. And over the next weeks there will be more fact sheets published on Ukraine and also on Chechnya. So please visit the website and see what we will share there. And after Anna has presented the report, there will be a very interesting panel debate. But first, as I want to say, a few words from our sponsor. And there will be some comments also in the end by the former ambassador to Norway, Liliia. So please, Jean-Christophe.
Hello, hello. My name is Jean-Christophe Delmas. So I work at Norad in the Nansen department for Ukraine. And firstly, thank you, Lena, and thank you to the Norwegian Helsinki Committee to giving me some minutes to come here and say a bit about what Norway is doing in a kind of general sense with regards to accountability in Ukraine. Now, I'm really excited to listen to more about the panel, about the work specifically that the Helsinki Committee does, that Hounds does. But now I'm just going to use a little moment to kind of open it up and talk about kind of the broad spectrum of actors that Norway is working with. So first, there was a figure that landed in my inbox a few days ago, which is 1,674. The title of the event is Facts Matter. That's the number of civilian casualties in June of this year. Of those, 384 are dead. That's the most civilian casualties in the war since May 22. Now, how do you arrive at a number like that? Now, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of painstaking work by a number of different organizations. It takes collecting evidence on the ground, it takes witness statements, and it takes fact-checking of all sorts. And this kind of work is essential if you want to arrive at some kind of form of accountability at the outcome of this war, whatever that might be. For that, you need credible, you need verified evidence. And to get there takes a lot of work. So the way that, when I say Norway, I say that the foreign service apparatus, I say parliament, I say the government, so it's a broad brush, so forgive me the simplifications. But we think about this broadly in 2 categories. There's on one hand, there's the work to do with investigations and documentation. This is the work, the important work that the Helsinki Committee does, among others. And that has to do with collecting evidence and ensuring that it meets the standards that need to be met so that they can be used in court in a credible way and in a way that won't be second guessed, in a few years' time. So that's one bucket of work, and I'll get into a bit more detail. And then there's the second bit, which is perhaps more complicated and difficult and grinding work to do with building the rule of law in Ukraine, building a system that can process these trials in Ukraine, but hopefully a number of these will be processed in Ukraine. And I think it's important to delve slightly into that. Now, I'll give you a few examples. So starting with the documentation work, Norway funds the Human Rights Monitoring Mission for Ukraine, UNHRMMU. It's a horrible acronym, but the work is quite simple. And that is a multilateral effort. They've been going on since 2014, and it's to do with, it's probably one of the gold standard, of course, the Helsinki Committee is one of them, but it's one of the gold standard efforts to do with collecting witness statements, among other things. They have thousands and thousands of witness statements. They use satellite imagery, forensic evidence, and they also do work in Russian occupied territory. And they've been building maybe the definitive record of civilian deaths since 2014. That's the number I cited at the beginning, it comes from them. And their work is used regularly by prosecutors in Ukraine and by the ICC. You have the International Commission for Missing Persons. It's an international organization, it's not a well-known one, but their work, they started with the Yugoslav wars, with finding missing persons there, and they're bringing to bear that expertise also in Ukraine. In Ukraine, there are an estimated 80,000 missing people. Most of them are soldiers, some probably held in captivity, some dead, some who knows. And the work of the ICMP has to do with supporting Ukrainian authorities to determine what happened with those people, supporting the families of those people, And to do so, they use advanced DNA and forensic analysis methods. So they have a laboratory in The Hague, which Norway is a hand in funding, which does seriously impressive work. Then there's civil society. This is many of the people in this room. And I know there are a few Ukrainian journalists here as well. And often your work is the first link in the chain of accountability. Often you're the first to witness things as they happen, to collect witness statements, and also to preserve local memory where you are. And so that's essential work, and Norway funds that work through now, and so far as we're able to map it, hundreds of organizations throughout Ukraine, wherever, I mean in every nook and cranny of the country. And that work of civil society is also important when it comes to building the rule of law, holding government to account in Ukraine, and making sure that the justice system is also accountable, that it functions as it should, smoothly, that it provides justice. And Norway also contributes to building up the rule of law in Ukraine, and other donor countries do as well. For example, by supporting the Center for Human Rights in Norwegian, the University of Oslo Center for Human Rights, they do training for, among others, the Prosecutor General, Nabo, Sapo, who became famous quite recently after the political upheavals of the past few weeks. And they help them to conduct non-coercive interviewing, which means basically interviewing without violence, without trying to push for the answer that you want in interviews. And this will be essential also later on in the process of building up fair trials where you won't have second guessing as to the quality of the evidence. And then just more generally also, there's a lot of work done with larger institutional actors. I'm thinking about the OECD, about the Council of Europe. They do a lot of work to do with this is the grinding, invisible work, the work where you often have backtracking, but it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, to do with reforming the justice system, fighting corruption, dismantling oligarchy in Ukraine. And this might not appear directly related at first to building up accountability, but for accountability to work, the whole system needs to work. It's not just one isolated part of the justice system that can work, right? And I think I've covered different aspects now of what Norway supports in Ukraine. And thank you for the time. And I hope that this will allow, maybe this provides some elements that you can build on in the discussion in the panel ahead. So I'm looking forward to hearing it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Jean-Christophe. This long-term stable funding from the donors is especially important for the documentation work. So we can only hope that this will just become even bigger than it has been. It's so important to keep the long-term focus, to have the capacities and the skills and the stamina, because these processes take very long time. So now Anna will present to you the main findings from our report on Balakliia. So yeah, the floor is yours, Anna.
Good afternoon. Oops. Done?
No?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Before we start our panel discussion, I just want to tell you briefly about Balakliia, a town in Ukraine which was liberated by the Ukrainian army after more than 6 months of Russian occupation. This liberation made it possible for investigators, human rights organizations, including our partner organizations, such as True Sounds, also represented here, to access the town, to see and document places where people were held and tortured, to speak with the survivors, their family members, and other witnesses. This information has been gathered and analyzed and became basis for this report as well. Now, Balakliia, as mentioned, is a small town in Kharkiv Oblast, and before the full-scale war, its population was around 27,000. Kharkiv Oblast is, as many of you may know, is located on borders the Russian Federation. and therefore it was not very surprising to see that Balakliia, such an important place, became one of the earliest targets of the full-scale invasion. Gathered facts from places that were or are still under the occupation show that arbitrary detentions are quite common during the occupation. People can be arrested anywhere, on streets, in parks, at public markets, or taken even from their own houses after illegal searches. And while the main targets of the occupying forces are those having any type of connection with the Ukrainian forces, the numbers here and the data processed in our database shows that the majority of the victims are actually civilians. Detentions can last from several days to several months or even years, and on the example of Balakliia, some people were released only after the town was fully liberated. Some people were found dead, while others disappeared without a trace. One of the patterns we see in the information our partner organizations collect is that often, soon after the occupation, places, buildings that used to be civilian buildings, such as schools, kindergartens, town administration, village councils, are seized and transformed into detention and torture chambers. For example, in Balakliia, such places were former publishing house, car park, or a police station. The most notorious among them was actually the police station, because it was a place where people were usually, as a rule, held for a longer period of time. And anyway, again, anyone, including men, women, could be detained there. Survivors describe being interrogated, often with the use of torture, such as electric shocks, mock executions, severe beatings, just to name some. The harshest methods were used against those who were suspected of supporting Ukrainian forces. Now, for more information about the life under the occupation, I really encourage you to read our report, here, available also back there. And our aim with this report was actually to show you, to the general public, and tell you the stories of victims who had to face the reality each day of the occupation. Unfortunately, Balakliia is not an isolated or a unique case. Our partner organizations have documented similar crimes, similar criminal incidents since 2014. We at the Norwegian Helsinki Committee have more than a decade-long experience in documenting grave human rights violations in Chechnya. And unfortunately, the pattern and the gravity of the crimes are often quite similar, because more occupation lasts, the more lives it claims. Thank you so much, and I'll be happy to answer your question after the presentations.
Thank you so much, Anna. The contents of the report are horrible, but a stark reminder of what we're actually talking about. And this is actually also what we are talking about during the negotiations, the meeting that will take place tomorrow in Alaska. If we're talking about ceding Ukrainian territory, there are people living on that territory. And as we can see from this report, what Anna just told us, how people were treated during 6 months in Balakliia is a clear indicator of how people are treated in the rest of occupied territories of Ukraine today, and how people will be treated if more territory has to be ceded to Russia in these negotiations that Ukraine are not even taking part in. This is a very important part that we want to shed more light on. And there are laws and procedures and institutions in place to protect civilians during war and conflict, and also to ensure that there are justice processes to punish those the perpetrators. And our distinguished panel today will take stock on these measures. So please come to the stage, Professor Camilla Cooper of the Norwegian Defence Command and Staff College, Valentyna Soloviova, who is Analytical Department Manager of Truth Hounds, and Gunnar Ekeløve-Slydal, who is Deputy Secretary General of the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. Please. Yeah, just maybe it would not be so warm also if we switch off that one. So please, let's start with you, Camilla. This is your line of work to say, and you have studied it for many years. Could you please break it down for us a little bit? What are these different laws and legislations? What difference are between them, and how are they supposed to protect civilians in war?
Yeah, I can. It's that's my turn.
Yeah.
No. Like I said, it's a very complicated set of rules, and it's complicated for the reason that it's been developed over so many hundreds of years. So it's trying to find the relevant rules for answering all those who are going to have to look at various treaties. And the question of cessation, for instance, so can actually Ukraine, as it is what's looking at the moment, be forced to give territory away to Russia in order for Russia and US to find some form of solution to how they perceive the problem? That's clearly going to be in violation of quite a few international laws, including particularly the UN Charter, which is the most basic in dealing with relations between nations, and the principle of sovereignty, which has been there since the 17th century. So it's, like I said, it's very old, very fundamental rules that it's most likely going to be violated. And then the other question is the investigations and proofs, what you actually need to prosecute and hold people responsible. Well, that depends on, we had a little discussion in advance as well, and we heard there's two big questions. One is the invasion itself, the unlawful invasion. And there's been huge developments over the summer with the Council of Europe establishing a court that is going to be able to assess the crime of aggression. But that's only going to do the crime of aggression, which is the unlawful invasion and attack on Ukraine. Not the war crimes, not the torture, nothing of those things, because that is a different crime. That's not part of the crime of aggression, it's a war crime. Mm-hmm. But the benefit of war crime issues is the fact that there's universal jurisdiction. So actually any country in the world can, and if they're able to, have to do something to prosecute. So is in that way an easier crime to prosecute than the crime of aggression, but it's a very big challenge related to facts. Because war crimes requires you to have facts about what actually happens at the field, in an armed conflict. And those facts traditionally have been very hard to find afterwards. And those investigations are commonly started after armed conflicts, and making it very difficult to locate the persons involved, what roles they had. There's a reason we're still prosecuting people from the Second World War. We're still struggling to locate because we didn't have the facts. But the massive difference in this conflict is the fact that not just Ukraine, but the international society started collecting facts from nearly day one. Mm-hmm. So there's massive amounts of facts. And then you have a different challenge from a legal perspective, because facts aren't necessarily evidence that you can use in court. But that doesn't mean the facts are not important, because a lot of the war crimes are very complicated to prove. I mean, some of them are in a way simple in the fact that the obvious crimes like torture, there's no question whether it's a crime. You don't have to investigate what exactly happened. It's quite obvious what happened. You just have to find out who. But then other crimes are more context dependent. And in order to understand, then you need more information about the context. We also need to have more information about the consequences, which will be more wide ranging. So in the conduct of a bombardment of a city, how was that conducted in accordance with the rules? Well, that requires a lot of basic information on the background, on the effects, And also you need information about what the Russians knew or should have known in the circumstances, which is usually quite hard to second guess. But in this situation here, we have all this systematic evidence, and you recognise, like you say, you have the same names that was doing. When they showed up in Chechnya, the same thing happened. When they showed up here, the same thing happened. Well, obviously someone knew or should have known that this was likely to happen, and in that way, this kind of evidence is incredibly important to help secure that holding people responsible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's a very complex field, but also so important. Valentyna, you are Analytical Department Manager of Truth Hounds, but you're also coordinating the documentation work of Coalition 5am, which is many more Ukrainian organizations, civil society organizations that are documenting war crimes in Ukraine. So in your day-to-day work, documenting and analyzing all these crimes that you come across in your work, which of these legal pathways are the ones that you see the most realistic, and what kind of success stories have you had so far?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for acknowledging the work of the coalition, because it comprises roughly 42 organizations, not only Ukrainian, but as well from Europe. So I'm glad that they joined this track of documentation. Well, overall, I'd say that Truth Hounds probably one of the unique organizations that conduct the full cycle of documenting, because we conduct field missions, we analytically preserve and transcribe this information, as well conduct strong legal interventions with advocacy campaigns. So basically the full cycle of working with fact sheets, with fact materials. Well, and you asked the bigger potential of this work. I'd say that for now we don't have the clear focus. It's either national or international proceedings. So I'd say probably the biggest challenge is that finding a balance between national and international, especially legal interventions. I'm really glad that we mentioned that special tribunal and the special mode of this tribunal, because apart from the crime of aggression, there are multiple other international crimes that has to be prosecuted, investigated, and eventually find a forum to be conducted. We conducting both of these, but for most we've focused and aimed at the national proceedings as well, because that might be the lead for the international tendency as well, because those tempos has to be more or less correlating. It is indeed true that we do not conduct documentation for the sake of documentation. Of course, upon launching a field mission, we do not know exactly what we may find during this mission, but overall all those missions are targeted to find missing elements of a particular crime. And it says that we are really working together with law enforcement agencies, and probably this is as well initially was a challenge, how those information and evidence gathered by the civil society will be perceived with the government, with law enforcement agencies. And for now there was initial skepticism. But I'm glad that it turned to be a really great partnership here, and I'd say that for the field mission now organizations, civil society and particular representatives are conducting a great amount of work, really upholding their law enforcement agencies. And so this partner work, and it resulted in a really great outcomes. I'll be talking particularly of the Balakliia topic, especially given that recently there were some positive outcomes as well. There suspicion notes one more. First, there was the head of the Balakliia occupation administration that was charged, and some representatives of the private military campaigns that actually conducted torture and in police station, which is what described significantly in this report, as well as representatives of people's militia, some collaborators as well. So the work is really being conducted analytically from all points of view, and it has to be understood that those work as well, not to say duplicating, but being informed to our partners in Europe as well, or in other places where we aim to advance the universal jurisdiction. So it's a complex work, but I'd say that overall it has to go hand in hand, and we have to constantly check our political momentum, legal momentum, and probably I'd say that advancing in international proceedings and international standards and practice, because it really tends to be more long-term, long-standing. It could take really decades to prosecute criminals. So we aim for international probably jurisdiction for top military leaders, while the great amount of work has to be conducted on a national level. And finding the balance is the key, and probably now the most challenging thing, not even from the legal perspective, but from the institutional capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. Gunnar, you have worked in the Norwegian Helsinki Committee for quite some years. You have long experience from both from Rwanda and the Balkan Wars and Chechnya, and a lot of atrocities happen in all those conflicts, despite of the international legislation in place to prevent it, and they were also dealt with in different ways to achieve justice afterwards. So what are the particular traits in the Ukraine case, which makes you think what would be one of the ways out for some sort of justice in Ukraine?
I think we can divide situations where war crimes and other grave abuses take place in two. You have those places where there are very little or no accountability. And when we say accountability, it's about trials and punishment, but there can also be other measures to inform and give some kind of reparation to the civilians' victims. And I have been studying the last months almost all situations where Russia were involved. I even started with Afghanistan, which was in Soviet times, and then I went to Chechnya, where there were two wars in the 1990s and in the end of 1990s and the 2000s. And then I went to Georgia and briefly also to Syria. And then I concentrated on Ukraine. So that will be a new study that we will publish in the coming month. And there was so little accountability in all those situations. And as both Lene and Anna said, you find the same patterns repeating itself. It's terrorizing civilian population, devastating, destructing civilian infrastructure. If you compare Grozny and Mariupol, you will see the similarities. The way the Russian leadership conducts war is simply anti-civilian population. And you find use of weapons which are either forbidden or only used by very few states. You find torture, and you find all kinds of harassment and threats against civilians, which are not part of the war or the fighting. That's the point. You don't have to target civilians in that way to win a war, to be a little bit cynical. But the Russians, they seem to do that in all their wars. This is not anti-Russian propaganda. This is facts. And it's about the Russian leadership who decides over their soldiers how they should behave. In that study, which will come, we will also discuss a little bit the reasons for this. I will not go into all that. On the other hand, you have situations where there were accountability, like after the genocide in Rwanda, after the wars in Bosnia, in Kosovo, and there are some striking differences. When there is accountability, and that can be international courts, like the UN courts for Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, but I think what has most effect is when there are national courts or courts supported internationally, because victims need to see justice, and it's hard to see it in The Hague from, let's say, Kigali. Well, that was actually not in The Hague, it was in Arusha, in the neighboring country. But still, it's the effect of accountability, of victims seeing that those who ordered, especially those who ordered and had the gravest responsibility, are made accountable. They had to answer in court, and there will be a fair hearing, and they will see, maybe they are not super happy with the outcome, but still they see that something was done to make some justice. It's extremely important, and I think you can see that in those societies that there is an effect. Of course, there are many other factors also, and accountability is not a cure for everything, but it can be a very powerful part of rebuilding societies and rebuilding rule of law and a sense of justice.
Thank you. Camilla, you mentioned there should be not the crime of aggression, and it has also come up here. What is so special about that tribunal? Is it the answer to our questions for justice? What is missing from that solution, if not?
It's missing any ability to deal with war crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So basically, it's only answering one question: is should Russia be there in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Yes or no? And that is not a satisfactory answer for anyone. I think it's the conduct whilst in Ukraine, which is what's it's most going to need the kind of feeling of justice and consequences and accountability in order to get the effects that you normally would want to see at the end of a conflict. The ability of people to move on will depend on having some sort of feeling that there's going to be justice for what's happened, and that needs to be dealt with through different systems. Like was mentioned, the international system is part of it. The International Criminal Court has already issued a warrant for Putin and other high-ranking officials for attacking civilians, and that is one important step. But the most important step is going to be the Ukrainian efforts to do the rest, basically, to prosecute anyone identified as involved in all the atrocities that's been occurring. And of course, Ukraine will be unlikely to be able to do that on their own. But primarily, this needs to happen in Ukraine, and then with the support of the international society. If, of course, one person shows up in Norway and Norway realizes that is a person involved in this kind of conflict or these kind of crimes, and Norway has the ability to prosecute, like was the case for Rwanda and from Yugoslavia. We've had cases in Norway.
Mm-hmm.
There's usually been people who have been given refuge in Norway and then later recognized by other refugees as being perpetrators of war crimes, and then be reported to the police and then prosecuted in Norway. And most of them also have been sent back. So again, sent back to the country, which in this case would be Ukraine, and then again, that is where most of the cases will need to be conducted, and that's also the best way of securing a sense of justice from the Ukrainian perspective, I would imagine, rather than everything happening far away with maybe not all the information from the court or access or to all the necessary information for the judges. So a lot more work needs to be done, basically.
Definitely. And Valentyna, you are you are doing this work on a daily basis. You meet with your colleagues, you meet with the victims, the survivors. If it's even possible to answer, what does justice look like? We have touched upon different options. What does it look like for you, for your colleagues, for the victims that are telling their stories, sharing their stories with you?
Well, I guess the question, what is justice means for Ukraine, really depends on whom you ask, actually. So I'm really glad for this dimensional approach. Well, for me, I guess the justice will be a synonym of establishing facts and granting survivors a dignified approach where they put in the center of any actually processes that are happening around, I know, peace talks or wherever we can try to correlate with bringing justice, with peace or wherever. For my colleagues, both within the civil society and I guess law enforcement agencies, the answer will be turning collected evidences into judgments, both as well on a national and international level. And I guess here the more is better to establish this sense of that it is impossible to avoid the just punishment for atrocities committed. Well, for the survivors, and here as I would like to probably add as well military corps here, that is vital that their struggles is understandable both within Ukrainian society and international as well, that they have this recognition and that their struggles is not put in some pit in a vein, it's not forgotten. And as well, I have probably the message for the society, because that is well vital to think of this, what justice will mean for the whole world, because this conflict is shaping is not only the Ukrainian future, even the regional European future, but overall the tendency of the peace dealing and addressing conflicts in the world as well, and shaping the international war as well. So for this purpose, actually within Hounds we work not only for the justice for the sake of justice, but overall we do this with the keeping in mind that our tactics and solutions may shape as well international law. We aim this as well, particularly when we work around the Balakliia report and findings from the Balakliia report, and even in the border case from the Kharkiv region as well. That partially was, from the legal perspective, a test for us, how we can approach the right to life in the sense of attacks happening on state-uncontrolled territory. That we try to actually find legal elements that, despite uncontrolled territory, there's an act of aggression causing legal consequences, and thus the right to life actually is breached. Yeah, and there are many more legal, I'd say, lacunas and legal mathematics here, especially when we talk about something that has potentially a huge dimensional approach. The Kakhovka Dam as well for us was a test within the ICC structure, how we can address and apply the article on the excessive incidental damage. And the same goes for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, how we try to find elements that actually breaches the international nuclear security. So all of this we do not only for this particular conflict resolution, but overall the world dimension, I'd say. And what we are lacking, I guess it can be divided into two components. First one is actually the infrastructure support, let's say. And the second one will be the international attention or advocacy, let's name it. As for the infrastructure support, I really would like to recall here the notion that that national system will eventually face the huge amount of consequences for this. There are many actually predecessors of this practice in Rwanda, Hakaka courts, and Sierra Leone as well. In basically latest huge conflicts, there was such a practice combining international dispute resolution mechanism and national, of course. That means that the national system has to be prepared for this, both infrastructurally and both in terms of qualified personnel. And all of this requires, of course, some support, sharing best practices. And the trick moment here is this is something that has a long-standing effect. You don't see immediately the results of this. Preparing the qualified personnel requires some time. Establishing an infrastructure as well requires some efforts. And the problem is there that you cannot simply copy-paste previous solutions. When we actually used the IDOC system, which previously was successfully applied for the Chechen conflict, we couldn't just simply copy-paste the existing technical solution and even classification here. Yeah, there's some similarities in this conflict. The aggressor state basically the same, and there's even the same patterns. Not all, but overall dependencies is evident. But overall, we have to adjust this, and it's only on the stage of evidence collection, and for the legal aspect as well. I guess even for the decade time period, the international law and society have significantly changed. So we couldn't even apply even the same. Well, overall principles could stay the same, but circumstances of this, I'd say, political momentum really implies. And for the support from the world, let's say from the regular citizens, our partners as well, I would say that you're lucky that you know about the war, but not the war in that sense that we face now. And probably even some notions we speak about here and that mentioned in the report, I don't know, torture, maybe just some notions from their vocabulary, and well, there's as well a point of view, but sometimes I'm afraid that may lack some human dimension when we speak about this. And in the process of this, it's vital as well to ensure that there's some representative of Ukraine who speak about this. It's impossible to decide something vital without conduct some discussions excluding Ukraine and Ukrainian predominantly point of view. So I urge you to listen and to find that what resonates deeply into you, and that will be as well the way of support to Ukraine and to this huge work that we conduct, because we here in Ukraine, especially in the documentation field, we appreciate this support, and that as well inspires us, because well, it's tough when you are alone into this tough topic, and understanding there is some expert support, infrastructure support, and we are not left alone in this process of documentation. I'm not speaking of the general spiritual support, but overall that's vital. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to open the floor. We are approaching the end of our hour. I wanted to open the floor for some questions. Yeah, I think you can ask in Norwegian also, and we will translate if necessary.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this call. I have two short questions. You were talking about accountability, and then I was wondering for actors such as private military security companies, and also for soldiers from North Korea, how does accountability look here? And the second question is about the landline treaty. And now that you have close contact with the government of Ukraine, civil society actors, can you influence not withdrawing from the landline treaty from Ukraine?
Yeah. Did you get
The second one was
about the landmine treaty? Maybe one for you and one for you.
We go to accountability then for Ukrainian perspective, anyone caught in Ukraine, it doesn't really matter if they're Russian, North Korean, or Wagner, or whatever other private military company. The challenge will be if they are not caught in Ukraine but travel back to their own country. In which case you, in a way, reliant on the nation itself, where they are, to either prosecute or extradite, which I would suspect for both Russia and North Korea is highly unlikely, unfortunately. But in the case where there's enough information to have a named person, you will be able to have an international arrest warrant on them, which limits for the rest of their lives where they can travel. Means even if they're not caught now, they're going to have to look over the back for the rest of their lives, because suddenly they will show up in an airport and they will get flagged. So not the best solution, but it means it's not really possible to get away. It's unlikely to get away forever, as in again referred to the Second World War, where they're still prosecuting.
I'll just add on this from the analytical point of view. That as well, we document such cases, and we've designed specifically for these special, unique features to be documented. And actually, the database we use and the approach we apply, methodological, is that everything is documented to ensure the flexibility and the possibility to track this in real time, so whether we spot, because we work, analytical department, for example, works with cooperation with monitoring department, so any mention, I don't know, in some social media or even newsletter, wherever, of this particular call sign or wherever, is immediately noticed and related to the profile of this particular person. Then it is put into some legal actions if it's an official request from the state, or we in return conduct some legal appeal in this regard. So I wouldn't say that process is that quick, because for most some diplomatic work has proceeded in this arena, but overall, it's nothing excluded. We have another question. Much for me.
I think that was really enough.
Really minor?
No.
Rather not.
I mean, for the Norwegian Armed Forces, not going to be doing politics, so that way, so we're not going to influence anyone.
We will note that. It seems that it's not in the direct mandate of any of us, but there is so many atrocities taking place, and we try to do what we can with most of them. But you can also ask questions to Anna about the report.
I just wondered about the big statistics in this war, because you hear different things. Are there any unequivocal statistics on how many people have lost their lives on both sides?
The question is on statistics on loss of lives on both
how many
sides.
people have lost their lives during this war? Soldiers and civilians.
There are indeed statistical work on this. There are no perfect consensus on the numbers, but there are more or less accurate estimates. It seems that Russian forces have lost around 800,000 to 1 million. That you can see from the numbers of military personnel, and then add the mobilization numbers, and then see the actual numbers in the different parts of the Russian army. So it's not rocket science, but it still gives an indication about the enormous losses of Russian soldiers. When it comes to Ukrainian civilians, I think Valentyna has the best answer, and also there are quite big losses in the Ukrainian army as well, but I don't have the numbers.
There are multiple precautions on providing some definitive numbers. The first is simply will be estimates. Explain that because sometimes what happens on the occupied territories, just after Carpatian. And the work is still ongoing, for example, for Mariupol. We do not exactly know the numbers of civilian casualties here. And but the more we obtain testimonies, recalls, and the more we do reconstruction of the site, and paired with some technology as well. So more or less we have the definitive number, I guess, the end of the heat stage of this war. As for the military personnel, well, unfortunately, that is state, luckily, that is state position that those numbers till the end of the active phase of the war won't be disclosed. But as well, we can, if you are enough advanced in the military strategic aspects, I guess you can understand how many forces that requires to defend or to be in an active position in the front line. But luckily those numbers are significantly less than the Russian losses of the military personnel.
Thank you. So we have, so just the last question behind them who already signed up, and then some closing remarks. Yeah.
Okay, it's more of an observation than a question. First of all, very impressive work, meticulous implementation of the association, and a very strong chain of custody. I just wanted to remind about one more victim, and just behind the scene, it's not the most important, which is the environment.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, the environment may have rights on its own. That's a debatable question, but it's also part of the right to life. It's also something which will be the context for Ukraine after the war. It's a big part of the discussion. I work in a non-profit Zone Environment Network, where it was very valuable. In Arendal, we collect environmental damage information. Some of that information is also used as information about the environmental crimes. In fact, the Office of Prosecutor General of Ukraine is quite interested in this kind of things, the environmental authorities, and we know truth Hounds also from the time of Delmas and some parallel work. What's interesting there is that there is much less available in terms of methodology, in terms of precision when it comes to environmental crimes, as opposed to crimes against humans. So even though it is very important, it's kind of hard to collect evidence in a solid reliable way. It's hard to deal with the investigation, it's hard to deal with the prosecution. So this is more a reminder that that dimension also exists, and I think we need to somehow connect to this in the future.
Yeah,
from those
thank you. In fact, Truth Hounds is working on a report very relevant to your comment/question.
So
you want to just mention
to reflect on that.
Yeah, you want to just briefly mention about that forthcoming report? So.
Oh, there are actually the two relevant topics. The first one is the virtual edition of the Kakhovka Dam explosion virtual mapping, actually, where will be a few dimensions of consequences. And environmental is the minor topic of this research as well. And for this, we actually introduced a new methodology, more like analytical one, and even taking some tests of water and contacting closely with the special prosecutorial branch for the environmental crimes. And the second is the report, the second edition for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant report as well, where we evaluate the environmental dimension as well, given the fact there's a whole ecosystem here happening, not for the environment, of course, but this is a significant factor as well related to the nuclear safety for the region. Thank you.
And I know Gunnar wants to add to this topic, I know for sure.
Yeah, two points. In many wars, you cannot divide really environmental and human damage because they are so linked, and that I think you can see very clearly in Ukraine. In a legal sphere, I think there are work to do on this crime. It's a war crime, but I think you need stronger provisions in the future because You see in so many wars that it's a strategy to destruct the environment. It's a war strategy. And I don't think we are really up to the task of criminalizing and making accountability for that. There is a working group now in the related to the ICC on the crime of ecocide, so killing the environment systematically. There are some skepticism among states to introduce a new crime. You have two new crimes, you have aggression and ecocide, who is knocking on the ICC's door, and I think there will need some more knocking before that happens.
Thank you. So unfortunately then our time is coming to be very close, but we have some closing remarks from Liliia Honcharevych of the Carpatian alternative to the Arendal. Please. Thank you so much.
I'm grateful for the Norwegian Helsinki Committee for organizing such an important discussion about the war crimes within the Ukrainian Democracy and Victory Hub that we have launched for the first time here at Arendalsuka, that will take place every year since today. And this is the hub that is co-organized by many organizations. And also like Carpatian Democracy Week, the Ukrainian analog of the Arendalsuka in Ukraine, that will take place in Truskavets next year on the 27th of April, and you will have the invitation right here or at the entrance of these premises. No peace is possible without justice, and no victory is possible without peace. That I would like also thanks the panelists for very informative and for the the work that you are doing behind the scenes in order to bring those responsible to account. Documented the atrocities that are committed by Russians simply because they can do that. And I would like also to mention, especially ahead of the meeting that will take place tomorrow, that nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and nothing about Europe without Europe. So that is the attitude of Ukrainians towards tomorrow's meeting. In reality, it's Putin's Russia certification of Trump's USSR weakness and appeasement policy. And the appeasement policy has never worked in the history, and it won't work neither now. And we are going to discuss this issue also, and also atrocities, further today during the Ukrainian Democracy and Victory Hub that will take place, continuation of it at the Assembly tent near NAV, near Clarion Hotel Stockholm, and where we have right now that I will be running to open the panel with the Ukrainian mayors, like from the front line, that have just come for this Arendalsuka. So you have a chance to join me in running to this panel just after that. And we will also have I will have the full program from 3 o'clock now until 6 o'clock, where we'll also have the next panel at 4. Now it's a mayor's panel. At 4 o'clock it will be Democracy Under Fire, with the ambassadors of Canada, with the ambassador of Sweden, with the NGO director, and with NAMO, and with a lot of others organizations. Where we'll discuss how to bring the victory closer, and at 6 o'clock we will have, at 5 o'clock we will have the civil society, and how the civil society are working today. And the civil society today, sometimes it's much more stronger and more effective and more quicker than the national authorities. So thank you for organizing such an important meeting, and hope for further cooperation. Slava Ukraini!
So thank you very much to the panel, thank you very much to all participants.